Hello and welcome to JWConcept, the YouTube channel dedicated to telling you the many ills of the Jehovah's Witnesses. As I'm writing this script, it's late June. You know what that means? Pride Month. Now, in part due to my upbringing as a Jehovah's Witness, I've never really been, and still aren't, all too involved in the socio-political sphere, and I certainly don't have any experience being non-straight. But after waking up, I've gotten to notice how Jehovah's Witnesses think about and treat those who are part of the LGBTQ community, and in particular, gay and lesbian people. Witnesses don't have a particularly good reason for their beliefs towards gay people, but also they say many unnecessarily negative and downright mean things about them too. They fall into the flawed reasoning of hating the sin, but not the sinner, especially in regards to homosexuality, currently hold some pretty ridiculous ideas about gay people, and have, in the past, said even more ridiculous things. But first, I want to especially thank two of my friends for helping me on this script. They know more about this space than I do. This script probably would have been much worse off without them looking over it, so I wholeheartedly thank them. Now, let's make sure we're on the same page. What is homophobia? Much like how Jehovah's Witnesses themselves do when they have a specific word their talk is based around, let's get a definition of ours, homophobia. Google gives us a pretty basic definition: a dislike or prejudice against gay people. Merriam-Webster says something similar: irrational fear of, aversion to, or discrimination against homosexuality or gay people. However, because these definitions are very basic, they're hiding a lot of subtext. It's important to understand how people act along with these basic definitions, so I prefer something more involved. Planned Parenthood, I feel, has a pretty good detailing on what homophobia means and adding extra context. It details what can constitute as homophobia. They state homophobia can take many different forms, including negative attitudes and beliefs about, aversion to, or prejudice against bisexual, lesbian, and gay people, often rooted in conservative religious beliefs. Fancy that. They also mention how homophobic people may use mean language towards gay people. As a tangent, they mention how biphobic people say people are bisexual just for attention. Finally, they detail how they face discrimination, including disallowing gay marriage, getting fired for being LGBTQ, or not allowed certain housing. As I said previously, getting to know how people act around a marginalized group is very important when discussing social topics like these. To someone who is one of these bigots, it's easy to Google search a definition and to rationalize that they don't hate gay people, but they have issues with the wants and actions gay people take. Detailing the actions that fit within the framework of a basic definition give a better view of how a word is actually used. And granted, I'm more than certain the majority of my viewers understand this to some degree and didn't need this lecture. However, I'm doing this mostly for two reasons. One, because I'm more than certain that in the future, actual Jehovah's Witnesses might come across this video, and they need to hear this the most. And two, it allows me to make very clear comparisons to the modern beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses, and to make sure we have as few misunderstandings as possible. Speaking of which, let's get into modern JW beliefs on this matter. I'm sure that anyone familiar with the discussion surrounding sexual orientation, acceptance, and religion has come across this saying: hate the sin, not the sinner. I'm going to go over why this is a bad belief in the next section within the context of JWs and homosexuality. But first, I figured I ought to give a foundation of what Jehovah's Witnesses actually teach on the matter, since I figure at least some of my viewers aren't too knowledgeable on it. In my opinion, the article "Is Homosexuality Wrong?" on their website is a good place to start. We'll cover more of the literature and articles on the subject, of course, but you'll find a lot of the same ideas there as you'll see here. Also, side note, this is found on the teenager section of their website, so take that for what you will. Now, I'm not going to read this word for word for you, but I'll give you a summary of the important points. The witnesses do indeed believe that the Bible doesn't support homosexuality. They make the claim that the Bible doesn't support hatred of gay people. They also try to say that people who quote-unquote practice homosexuality can change. As you may be aware, the idea of being gay and practicing gayness are two different things in the mind of these religious types. This is also what relates most to the hate the sin, not the sinner talking point. Since, see, they don't hate gays, just doing gay things. This is in a different article, also in the teen section by the way, but they also flirt with the idea that just because you find yourself attracted to someone of the same sex, that doesn't mean that you're gay, and try to pass it off as a phase. There might already be numerous red flags in your mind just from that summary, but I'm going to bring up this little bit from the article right here, where they're trying to say that their belief is okay because there's an equivalence of expectation. This is true. However, wouldn't you know it, a lot of discrimination isn't from lacking equivalence of expectation, but a lacking equivalence of outcome. In my previous video, I had briefly mentioned sexual immorality. To briefly recap, sexual immorality is typically defined by sex outside of marriage. However, wouldn't you know it, But gay sex also counts as sexual immorality. Also in my last video, which at this point you should totally watch after this, I talked about disfellowshipping. I'm just gonna let past JWConcept explain it. They call it disfellowshipping, and it's more than just being kicked out. You're no longer allowed to talk to anyone who's a part of the religion, and they're not allowed to talk to you. Your Bible teacher? Off limits. Your friends in the congregation? Off limits. Your believing relatives? Off limits. You probably see where I'm going with this. Not only is sexual immorality a disfellowshippable offense, but so would gay sex. However, there is a way around this. Like I said, sexual immorality is only that if it's done outside of marriage. Should Jehovah's Witnesses allow gay people to get married, then there'd be no problem. So, do Jehovah's Witnesses allow that? Do you think they do? Article: Does the Bible comment on same-sex marriages? Answer: yes. Does it allow for gay marriages? Answer: no. This makes for a very obvious inequality. Straight people are allowed to have sex. They're just required to wait until marriage. Afterwards, they can fuck like bunnies for all God cares. So as long as it's not something kinky. A bit on that later. However, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, God doesn't support gay marriage. So, if you want to keep God's command as a gay JW, you are forced to never have sex. Your stance is totally unreasonable, and by its very nature, discriminatory. And as we already know, discrimination based on sexual orientation is rightly defined as homophobia. There's an irony here. In a 2016 Awake article, they claim that the Bible doesn't promote homophobia and condemns the mistreatment of gay people. But I would consider everything we just discussed as homophobia and mistreatment. But then again, in the same article, homophobia is described simply as hating or having prejudice towards gay people. Remember what I said about Google definitions? Yeah, this is why. Bringing us back around to the previous section, given what little we've discussed on the matter, you can start to see the major flaw with the hating the sin but loving the sinner position. Do you really think, with what we've been shown so far, that a Jehovah's Witness can separate the sinner from the sin? They go on and on about how they focus on the sexual conduct and how much they hate it. It feels like doublespeak to assume that they don't hate the people. Especially since they also teach one of the reasons God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah was that they were being too gay. Finally, let me bring to your attention the book that's currently being studied, Pure Worship of Jehovah, Restored at Last. For context, during the midweek meeting, Jehovah's Witnesses have a specific publication that usually lasts around a year or two that they'll read through and answer questions on. Every witness is expected to read it, every week. In chapter 14, paragraph 19, they talk about homosexuality. What is it that they say the Bible says? Reference scripture, Romans chapter 1 verse 32. Although these know full well the righteous decree of God, that those practicing such things are deserving of death. I'm not going to get into it much here, since I'm definitely not the most qualified to speak on it, and this video is probably going to be long as it is. But this is wholly ignoring the reality of children or relatives who are LGBTQ. Many of them are going through serious family pains, and many probably get kicked out or ghosted. It's also ignoring the anecdotes that I have of witnesses that have been around just scorning the idea of gay people having rights, or being accepted for who they are. But, dear viewer, we still have a ways to go, because Jehovah's Witnesses are special. They can't just rest with loving the sin and hating the quote-unquote sin of homosexual practices. No. They've got plenty more where that came from. In my opinion, the previous defense is almost blissfully ignorant in its formation. It's based off the notion that somehow, not only can we wholly separate the actions of people from themselves, which is like saying if someone does bad things, you can still think of them as a good person, but also that actions don't make up the people. Sure, you don't have to have sex to be gay, but one of the facets of being gay is who you'd like to have sex with. Not allowing someone to express that makes them feel awful. I can imagine that a lot of people think this way simply because they haven't thought it through and could potentially not mean much harm behind it, by itself at least. However, this general belief that being gay could cause problems and that gay sex is a problem can lead people down more aggressive lines of thinking that are overtly and wholly bad. We're going to quickly list out a variety of other things the witnesses say about gay people and sex. First, there's the idea that the Bible isn't cruel in not allowing gay people to have sex the way they want to. They suppose it's based on the belief that people have to act on their sexual impulses, or that they shouldn't or can't be controlled. They then follow it up by saying the Bible quote-unquote dignifies humans by them being able to resist their urges. They also push the idea that just because you might find yourself attracted to someone of the same sex, you aren't gay. I don't doubt that not every instance of same-sex attraction immediately means you're gay or bi, but the tone tends to minimize the potential that it could mean that you're gay or bi. They tend to point to hormones or societal pressure for being reasons why you might be same-sex attracted. This image in particular is, again, in the teens section, and the URL literally ends with pressure to be gay. They also attempt to equivocate people calling JW's beliefs on the subject intolerant using a smoker or angry person. They say something along the lines of, just because our opinions are different, that doesn't make the other narrow-minded, and try to say that asking someone to change makes you the narrow-minded one. They've also, on more than one occasion than I'm showing here, have referred to pro-gay media as gay propaganda. This time, this one's found in a book called Young People Ask Answers That Work, Volume 2, which, you guessed it, is a book made for teens. All these teachings are, in my opinion, far worse to tell people than what we previously talked about, and to no one's wonderment, the only reason why any of this even exists is because God said no. I haven't used the word argument to describe anything I've talked about thus far, besides the fact that there's not one valid reason to keep gay people from the privileges of stuff like marriage and not having a religion spend time, effort, and server space on why your sexual interests are immoral or unclean. Jehovah's Witnesses don't even try. Their sole reason why any of these defenses or justifications exist is simply because they interpret some Bible scriptures as saying gay's bad. Leviticus 18:22, Romans 1:24 and 26, and 1 Corinthians 6:9 and 10 are a few of the scriptures they base their beliefs off of. These scriptures themselves don't actually try to put forth any logical reason for the belief either. It's the equivalent of citing your parents as the reason why you think something is bad, an authority that not everyone holds to the same standard. When the authority is stripped from the figure they got the belief from, what's left? In the Jehovah's Witnesses case, all that's left are meritless justifications for a belief that made no sense to begin with. But just saying that isn't enough. So let's go through, one by one, on why all the other stuff I just listed are bad justifications on their own merit. Starting with the smoker analogy, to put it bluntly, it literally doesn't make sense. It's a false equivalency. It'd be more accurate if the non-smoker was physically or emotionally forcing the smoker not to smoke anymore, at the very least around him. Remember, Jehovah's Witnesses don't allow for showing your homosexuality in any appreciable way. The issue isn't entirely that JWs hold a different view from us, but it's the actions people take from those beliefs that are bad and discriminatory. On a side note, Jehovah's Witnesses do in fact view smoking as repugnant, and do in fact force people who want to be a part of the religion to stop smoking. Here's another easy one. No one is saying people have to act on their sexual desires, and we have some very mean words for those who can't control their sexual urges. But the whole issue is that gay people in this religion have no way of satisfying their sexual desires, which again, creates discriminatory inequality. That's why the Bible stance is cruel, because it shuts down the option. I can't speak on it with the most authority, but even supposing that same-sex attraction can oftentimes not mean you're gay, that doesn't excuse the invalidating tone that accompanies it. That's on top of the fact that I'm sure it doesn't happen nearly as much as Jehovah's Witnesses would like to portray it as. This also doesn't include how bad it is to insinuate that people are pressured to be gay or bi. Do I have to explain why the gay propaganda bit's wrong? It's just so stupid. I'm more than certain that if you wanted to poke around the JW's website for more ridiculous modern-day ramblings on their views of homosexuality, you could. This, though, ends everything I want to talk about in that regard. However, I've been saying this whole time that this is their modern beliefs. If you weren't aware, Jehovah's Witnesses have been a religion in some capacity for over 100 years. We're not everywhere we need to be in regards to our treatment of the LGBTQ community, but you have a Christian religion born in some deeply homophobic times with modern beliefs as wild and ridiculous as what we covered. How much crazier could they have been? Where coming out was still seen with quite a bit of ridicule. This section is mostly a gallery of pointing and laughing at a few older publications and the stuff they used to write, so I'm not going to go too deep into the analysis. And I don't think I'm really going to need to, as you'll see soon enough. This is still such a stupid name for an article. It's dumb. The section name is the literal title of an Awake magazine article from 1983. It starts by quoting but not quoting Dr. Charles W. Socarides, a man who, in an age where medical science was moving away from classifying homosexuality as a disease, still confidently thought that it was, and that it was curable. The next few paragraphs are just saying that being openly gay is being more and more of a normal thing. But given what we've gone over in this video, and contextually, it feels more like they're trying to stir up negative emotions in their mostly Christian audience of the day. Then they end the article by affirming that first century Christians didn't view homosexuality as normal, and that you can control and even overcome your gayness.
Welcome to the Salty Spittoon. How
Gay.
are you?
Here we have another Awake magazine article, this time from 1986. So 3 years and nothing really changing. First paragraph is again just saying that being openly gay is becoming more normal. But again, it comes off as they're lamenting this fact. They have a section titled, and I shit you not, Growing Propaganda for the Gay Lifestyle. All this section are them listing a variety of people and organizations supporting gay people. To us cultured and reasonable non-cultists, nothing in this section comes off as bad as the article wants you to think. At the very end of the section, they mention someone talking about the idea that heterosexuality is superior and is causing prejudice. They then transition into the next section with the sentence, but isn't heterosexuality superior? Viewer, I propose the idea that being white is superior is causing a lot of prejudice. But then again, isn't being white superior? I don't think I need to say much more to describe why that sentence is so very, very wrong. Nor do I think I need to describe why the third section having love in quotes is wrong. They mention that practices involving gay love were too shameful for Paul to relate or talk about. Then they mention a time where he did talk about it. On a side note, I'll admit I'm not much of a Bible reader or scholar. Personally, I'm an atheist, and anything the Bible says doesn't really mean anything to me. But their quoted scriptures in Ephesians come off as putting together two separate ideas to make it seem worse than it does. Ephesians 5:3 does talk about sexual immorality, which in the context of JWs makes sense, but verse 12 makes less sense. It would seem to me that the shameful even to relate was the ending to a different idea about liars and keeping away from unfruitful works. And this seemed to be a clever, if not poetic, ending to a theme of light versus dark. That's how I see it anyhow, and I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments. Anyways, the section also shows that witnesses have absolutely no tolerance outside the most vanilla of sexual practices. Apparently, masturbating your partner, oral and anal sex are among some quote-unquote shockingly unbelievable practices. We can then laugh at the true absurdity that being gay descends in the sadomasochism. The idea of a kink was obviously lost on Jehovah's Witnesses back then, and I can assure it still is. Also again, what? If you haven't recovered from that last part, you're certainly not ready for the gay harvest. You reap what you sow, as the saying goes. And this paragraph is dead set on letting you know that the reaping of gays is a healthy dose of AIDS. For context, this was in the middle of the AIDS and HIV epidemic, but this is also 3 years after some of the first cases suggesting that straight sex could also transmit the disease. Mind you, they're still heavily playing into the AIDS scare and really trying to hammer the point that being gay and having gay sex have serious health risks. The last paragraphs are just trying to convince you that God's way is best, and being gay is not a good lifestyle. Really, nothing we haven't seen before, except maybe an instance where they, at best, insinuate that homosexuality is curable.
Me and my best friends, we love jerking off.
The last book we're going to be looking at is called Your Youth, Getting the Best Out of It. This one predates all the other material we've looked at so far, 1976. In it, we're going to look at the chapter named in the section. As the section and chapter title might have alluded to, this is about masturbation. A lot of the earlier paragraphs are just trying to convince youngins not to slide their snake, but the wild ride begins once they bring gayness into the picture. In fact, they say that opening your ranch bottle can bring the big gay into your picture. I'm not kidding. They literally say that masturbation can lead you to being gay. They're saying that by getting dissatisfied with solo play, you'll seek out another partner. They fail to acknowledge that people aren't just gonna take anyone. If you're gay, you're gonna want a partner of the same sex. If you're not, you're not. But I guess they think you're gonna be desperate enough to settle, huh? Something I haven't mentioned so far, but in a couple of articles and in a really bad PDF on defending your belief on being gay, is that they try to avoid the argument of whether or not you're born being gay. They typically say that the Bible doesn't say one way or the other, and then try to shift the argument to the quote-unquote conduct, which we already discussed. However, the witnesses of this time had the balls to straight up say that, no, you're not born gay, and that being gay is learned. They then relate an experience of this guy who probably had his realization pretty young, and possibly under very creepy pretenses. He then has a bunch of gay sex, but eventually comes across the idea that it's unnatural and he feels bad, but keeps on going cause why not? He eventually quote-unquote conquers his tendencies. A fun observation is that this story doesn't prove what they're saying. He didn't say he became straight. They just say that he stops having gay sex. That's ignoring the fact that they're also trying to use his shame as proof that being gay is bad, not really addressing the fact that they're the ones who made him feel ashamed to begin with. He even said that he had no realization of doing anything wrong. The argument that being gay is bad because we made him feel bad he was gay doesn't hold up to any logical scrutiny. There are, of course, many other issues with this chapter, and they're not important to this video in particular. On a tangent for my XJW viewers, paragraph 18 mentions that your clothes shouldn't rub up on your genitals. Could this have been the beginning of Tight Pants Tony? As fun as long as this video is, this is just the surface. I've only gone over some of the written media the witnesses have produced about this. They've got a few videos that I intend on checking out for a part 2 to this sometime in the far future. Until then, though, I hope this was a good look at what the JWs are taught and how it constitutes as homophobia. The literature about other LGBTQ topics like being trans or bisexual don't get nearly as much attention, but the feelings and reasonings are roughly the same. If you aren't straight and cis, you've got some changing to do. But you don't, actually. You're fine just the way you are. And it would be fine if you subscribe to my channel and like the vid. You could also ring the bell if you want. I've got plenty more where this came from. Until then, though, see you later.
You disabled them.
Huh?
You disabled the fly. I finished him.
Ah.
He was on the floor wobbling for his life. I let him wobble a little bit. He tried to wobble across the floor. I let his ass. Yeah, I let him try to act like he was gonna run. And I bam!